Good morning, everyone.
We're official. I catch
Thank you all for coming. My name is Nick Malatesta. I work for Mark Warner, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to introduce today's panel. Starting on my right, Regina Cook, the Corporate Training Lead, Workforce Development Specialist, and Organizational Development Strategist at Virginia Western Community College. Lauren Shotwell, Manager, Environmental Social Governance at Altria Client Services. Laura Vaught, Vice President for Federal Affairs at Dominion Energy. And Beth Jafari, Vice President, Government Affairs at Hilton. With that, thank you all for coming. I'll sit down and kick it off to Regina.
All right, thank you, Nick. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? Show of hands, can you hear me okay? Wonderful. So, thanks for all being here today. I was walking in and praying so much that wind would die down. It didn't, and I went, this is going to be a very cold walk from the parking lot, but that was okay. I love the Hotel Roanoke and the facility and this town. So it's a privilege and honor to be here and be able to do this. But it also started me to think about winds of change. And so it ties very much to this session about navigating your career and your leadership and your growth. I am with incredible individuals who I've had a chance to work with and go over some of the session questions that we're going to be asking. And so we will go through what we have developed that we think will be extremely helpful to all of you, but then we will open it up for plenty of time for questions and answers. So start thinking about those things. We can assemble what we think will be helpful. However, we want to make sure that this is customized expressly to you. Okay? So without further ado, our first question for our panelists: what is one leadership development experience that you recall that provided the most career propulsion?
Okay, so can y'all hear me? Okay, so I'll kick us off. That experience for me, Regina, was when I started at Altria almost 10 years ago now, and I was engaging with some of our leadership team members and asking what they did to get to where they are. And a common theme was an advancement plan that you're in charge of. So I created a live document that I still utilize today. And what I did within that is identified where I wanted to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. But the most important part of that was also establishing my values. And that took a little bit of time because I was in a new business, learning a new company culture, but also identifying what was important to me and eventually my family. And it has evolved over time. But what I've always made sure is that what I'm aiming for fits in with those values and in the order that they need to be. So prioritizing them and making sure that I set up really clear boundaries with my managers. So what I do is when I start a new position, I go through that document. I keep that document live at all times so that if anyone wants to have a career conversation with me, I send it to them beforehand so they can get a little bit of insights so they're not spending that 30-minute quick connect asking me these questions. They can digest it and we can dive a lot deeper than I had in the past. And then finally, it was keeping track of the advice that these connections were giving me. Because a lot of times you go into a networking, I call them coffee connects. You know, you go in and you're asking them, who do you recommend I talk to? And they're throwing things at you. But are you holding yourself accountable to actually follow through? Because they're more likely to help you again if you can show what you did based on their advice, and they probably aren't going to remember what they told you either. So it's good to document those just high-level notes. I always meet with a person that they tell me to meet with, and I thank them for the connection, because you don't know what conversations they're having behind the scenes either, and you want to make sure that that person knows that you're taking their advice seriously. And one of those coffee connections, 3 years later, she ended up being my boss. So that, I think, has been the most beneficial experience and tangible experience in my career so far.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Lauren. That self-accountability, but that consistent plan and the reference back to your values, it's so critically important. Laura.
Yes. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. I have kind of a two-part question or two-part answer to this. In terms of like specific tangible activities that I've had the opportunity to do during my career that I think have been the most beneficial, as part of a leadership class that I was taking a few years ago, I was given the opportunity to do a 360 review, kind of a formal 360 review where you go out and you have your different people in your network, people that work for you, people that you work for, just different people kind of give some honest, anonymous feedback, and they graph it all out for you, and it is a really helpful way to build one of the plans that Lauren was referencing and kind of have an individual plan. If anybody has an opportunity to do that, I highly recommend it. That said, it's an expensive tool. Not all companies do it. I totally get that. But there's a way to kind of create that same dynamic, even if you don't have necessarily the access to that formalized tool. And it really is, I think, just through having conversations and finding people that will, in fact, give you honest feedback about what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And from that, you can kind of tweak whatever thoughts you have about what you want to do and play into your strengths and figure out if there are ways that you can bolster areas where you might be weaker. And so I think just creating the ability to get that feedback from like people who you interact with in different ways, both kind of up and down the reporting chain. And then the other thing that I would say, which is kind of the much less formal, the specific leadership lessons that I have learned in my career have come so much from just watching people and how they handle things in meetings, and especially bosses that I have had, and just observing. And if you have the opportunity to actually ask them, why did you handle this challenge this way? Or I've spent a lot of time with one of my former bosses talking to her about how she put together her senior team, and it really is invaluable to just kind of intentionally sit in meetings and observe people with that lens of just trying to learn how they interact, especially if it's obviously somebody that you really admire, but you can learn the other way too.
Learn what not to do. Okay. So very true there. So you mentioned about the 360 and the, I'll call it vertical and horizontal feedback. But I guess a follow-up question there, it can be very, very difficult to really find the trustworthy sources that will be very honest with you, but in a positive way.
Right.
Is there a special concoction process step that you've learned along the way to help, I guess, really identify those wonderful feedback sources?
Sure, I do. I think that I would say make the list of who you think should be on it, of 8 to 10 people. Sleep on it. You'll probably find that you have immediately listed the people that you have the best relationships with and the people that you work with the most. Take a couple of those people off and add people who maybe you even didn't have a great interaction with or a great experience with. Add people that you don't work with as frequently, and just kind of make sure that you are challenging yourself to get the full kind of spectrum of types of interaction that you have. And then if you have the ability to do so, get someone that you know and trust who knows your environment well enough to look at that list and give you feedback on whether or not they think you've hit the mark.
I think that's a great idea. Fantastic feedback there. Beth, what is one leadership development experience you recall that provided the most career propulsion?
Thanks. Nice to be here with you all today, and thanks for spending some time with us. I am new to corporate world, and so I came up in a world, I don't have a lot of what I would say formal leadership experiences. I didn't have formal training. I found myself in leadership roles, but I kind of learned as I went along, to be honest. I come from government. There's not a ton of resources there. So my experiences are from things that happened and how I grew from them. And most of those things are terrible things, right? That's when you learn the most, when you come out of it. And Senator Warner is hosting this. I worked for a senator for a long time from Texas, and so I'll just kind of recount one thing. We had a lot of storms in Texas, so I'd find myself down there dealing with people in real times of crisis where they may have lost everything. And what I learned from that experience, our role in that as the federal government is pretty narrow. And so it was kind of really being precise about what our role is, why we were in the room that day. And our role, to be very specific, had to do with FEMA. And for somebody who had lost everything, what does that mean? It means you can get them to a hotel room. It means you can get them to have a roof over their head and a dry place and some place to land for the next kind of short term. But when people have lost everything and you're in there and you're in the middle of a crisis, and I swear this has some real applicability, you need to be there for a reason. Otherwise, you're just taking up room and you're making noise at a really difficult time. And it's like, I don't have the answers for the next 3 months, but we can help you. You know, here's who you talk to for a loan for the short term. Here's who you talk to get this dry roof over your head. And so, when I'm leading teams, it doesn't have to be in times of crisis, but it's really defining why you're in the room and what you're adding. And I think being honest with that. And sometimes you're just in the room to learn. And I don't want to say just, because that's just as important. But I think really thinking about why you're there and trying to get the most out of it. And sometimes that's for yourself, and that's okay. But just being deliberate about why you're present.
Thank you so much for that. So leading with intent, growing with intent are things that we need to stay focused on all the time. What is our reason? What is our role? What is our purpose for being in any given situation or any given environment? And what we can glean from that is tenfold if we're not very prescribed about our intent with what we do. Thank you all. Question number 2. We'll come back to you, Lauren. Describe a recent workplace challenge and how you overcame that challenge.
So this year, I was to implement a new project and transition a strategy that had been implemented years ago into a new strategy. And when you're working in a large corporation, there are so many stakeholders. And what I've come to realize is you can plan, you can try to check all the boxes, you can have the conversations with as many stakeholders, but understanding that it's not going to go completely smooth. And the most important thing that you can do is managing your leadership's expectations on, hey, I can pivot quickly. I can't plan for everything, because if you plan for everything, you wait for nothing. And I had a lot of time to reflect on that this year and how I want to advocate for projects in the future. And it was a lot of learnings, to be honest. There was just a lot of people that had to be on board, a lot of stakeholders. And, owning your mistakes or owning, hey, I can't predict it all. I can't be it all the time. So just being transparent and honest, but also not hiding from it. And that's one of the biggest learnings that I took away this year, is using my voice, which I have lost partly, as y'all will tell today. But utilizing my voice and not being scared to stand up for myself.
All right, so well stated on using your voice. Right, can we hear that for Lauren? I also heard a golden opportunity for grace and patience, right? So thank you for bringing that to our attention, because I think the faster that our cultures are starting to move, our environments are starting to be agile, new competitive advantage. You mentioned pivoting. We can't plan it all. Strategize, re-strategize. Grace and patience. Grace and patience.
Well received. However, would you be able to give us a you have gone through and utilizing all those things you have told us? That would be much better.
Yeah. So essentially, I spent months planning, had a timeline in place, and started implementing. I knew based on other projects that I have on my plate what was realistic of an end time. Unfortunately, not always does your stakeholders understand what's on your plate. So let's say roughly I manage 10 projects. This is one project. I know that I need 2 months to get this other project done, so this is going to be put on hold. And unfortunately, that wasn't communicated clearly because this project wasn't in relation to this one. So I wasn't clear about my, I'm trying to think of the word, but my bandwidth. Yeah. So, and capacity, yes. And so being able to advocate for that after the fact was very important. And once I was clear about that, like, hey, I need to focus on, and it's our CDP reporting, if you know anything about ESG, which is very time sensitive. You have less than 8 weeks. You've got deadlines to meet, where this other project had a lot of flexibility, even though other stakeholders wanted the information now. That just wasn't realistic for my bandwidth. I'm a one-person team, and it was just, hey, I need to communicate this, and then in the future, I need to be more clear about, hey, the reason why this has a 2-month lead time is because I've got to pause this work and work on X, Y, and Z, and then I'll pick it back up and get you your final reports. Thank you for understanding, essentially. Does that help?
Yeah, in a nutshell, you have to manage your stakeholders. Because one stakeholder group is not necessarily, they might be on project A, and then all of a sudden another stakeholder group comes from project B and C, and they can't see each other. So managing and communicating with your stakeholders for everything is critical. Otherwise, the big B word, the burnout word, or something else is going to kick in, and that stress level will not let you grow and perform to your optimal level. So, I manage your stakeholders, essentially. So fantastic. Laura, one challenge and how you overcame it.
Yes. So I'm actually going to build a little bit on what Lauren was saying there, and I'm happy to give, kind of more specific examples. But in my career, you could have anything from, and I'm seeing some of my former colleagues here today, which is great. But you can have anything from kind of a, in my former career, I worked for government as well. Spent some time working on Energy and Commerce Committee. I worked for the Environmental Protection Agency for a while. Wow. I remember one specific day when we got a phone call that we're seeing some elevated lead numbers coming out of the system in Flint, Michigan. And it's like, okay, this is a crisis that we're going to have to deal with. Or you might have a day where you have two folks on your team who have had a little spat, and you can't, you've got to kind of step in and figure out how to navigate that. The thing that I think is the common thread, no matter the scale of the challenge that you're seeing, is a lot of what you all were just talking about. You have to figure out who the stakeholders are, and that both means making sure that you have all of the voices and perspectives in the room that you need, but also, to Beth's earlier point, making sure you don't also have 25 people who just want to opine and who may be great, but not necessarily what you need to deal with a specific challenge. Right. And then also, I think kind of a little bit of what Lauren was saying, I totally agree with. You have to be organized, but you also have to be flexible. So kind of finding that balance between being organized and being flexible, I think, and managing the stakeholders and making sure you have the right stakeholders, I think is the theme that applies to any challenge that you kind of encounter.
Yeah. Well stated, Laura. Well stated. Beth.
Challenge, right? One challenge. So
just one. Just one.
Well, I have a big one. So I'm just kind of all out there, just transparent. I'm 56, and I just made a big job change about 14 months ago. I came from a job that I had been in for 20 years that I don't want to say I could do it in my sleep, but I knew it really, really well. And so I have a challenge every single day, just trying to understand what I am doing, to be honest. And it's a
Transferable skill set.
there is, and I keep reminding myself I didn't just land here from nowhere. I did come here with some skills, but at 56, I do think, wow, this probably would have been easier at 46. But here I am, and this is what I'm doing. And then I just constantly remind myself, a million people have done this. So don't stay in a bubble. Talk to people. Find your resources. Find your allies. But that can be hard. So my challenge every day is kind of separating the smoke from the signals, the noise from the signals, because there's so much noise. And then when you're in a new place, it's like learning a foreign language almost. You just don't know. And I come home some days and I'm just exhausted because I don't know what half the nouns mean. That people string nouns together. I was just joking about that. And I'm like, what do these 7 nouns mean now that they're all in one sentence? But giving myself a lot of grace and just kind of coming back. But change is good, and I remind myself of that too. But it really is testing a lot of skills that got very rusty. Because when you do the same thing for a long time, you just everything's automatic, and so now nothing is automatic. So it's a challenge every day. But I've got great people around me and great resources, and just going back to them and not doing it in a bubble.
Strength for stepping out there. So along stepping out there, what was the final piece that said, I'm going to take this leap? What was that last driving piece to leave automatic, long-term, and step into the great unknown?
Well, some of it is, again, being blunt. I worked for government for a long time, almost 30 years. That is a long time.
Yeah.
And it's public service, and it was a great and wonderful thing. It suited me well. But I think as women, like, we have to do things to take care of our future. And it was also a pressure cooker. And I was in the middle of it for a long time. And I think you think, oh, I'm managing this well. This is going swimmingly, but it's still a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
And you kind of trade one for another to some degree, but some of it was just it was just time. And I think we're going to talk about it later. You're taking care of parents, and there's a lot of press, a lot of push and pull in your life. And it was time for me to get out and do something new. And then somebody had told me I was getting close to 50, and they said, sometimes that first step out doesn't always work, and you need to take it soon, because if it doesn't work, you might then be 55, and you need to start thinking about how you're going to start pressing up against maybe a time it's going to be a little harder to make that next step. And sure enough, the first one I took out wasn't the right step. I was there for 7 months, and then I ended up very lucky to be at Hilton. So just kind of taking a deep breath and going on the journey, and realizing nothing's permanent, right? You got to take a leap of faith.
I give you a lot of credit for that.
And you're never going to know. So.
Well, you can't know everything, right? But you do have to be courageous. All right. We talk grace and patience, but courage, right? To step out, courage to make the change, courage to. Did you move from Texas?
No, I've been in D.C. forever.
Okay, so D.C. forever, so we're good there.
Transferable.
Same environment. Right, transferable skills, that's where we are. Thank you all very much for the feedback for everyone attending. And I guess let's go ahead and move this whole challenge notion forward, because things are changing faster than ever. Beth, I'm going to start with you on this one. What is the challenge that we have to be ready for in 5 years?
I'll confess, this is the exact question I told Laura. I didn't have a great answer for. She goes, I do. The workforce is changing. It's something we talk a lot about at Hilton. And I mean, AI keeps coming up. And I haven't figured out the least on quite how to use that. I think there's ways to make us more efficient at what we're doing and just take in information more quickly. But skill sets are evolving, and how you keep up with that. And I haven't had, again, I'm new in my role, and I have led teams over the years, and I know the 80-20 rule. 80% you react, 20% you step back and you try to plan. I haven't stepped back to try to figure out the work challenge in 5 years. So I'm truly going to defer to you.
Well, I don't know if there'll be words of wisdom or just observations. I totally agree. I think that actually was a great answer. I agree. Like the technology, the evolution of technology, and we hear a lot about AI too. None of us knows exactly what that is going to look like. I think one of the things that I'm seeing that I think is going to maybe even on a quicker than 5-year timeline that's starting to kind of come to a head for those of us who work in the corporate environment is that we had this long period during the pandemic where folks were working from home, and then we were on Teams or Zoom or whatever meetings back to back to back all day. And then there's a push to get back into the office and to do that either hybrid or full time, which is great because then you can see people and you can collaborate. But we still have the online meetings that are back to back to back, and kind of the intersection of those two things of moving things more to in person, but still having the constant online, no breaks in between schedule, I think is something that is in fact currently starting to come to a head. And then you layer in some of the more technology things that are coming and AI. And I think that for me, all of this stuff ends up coming back to communication about bandwidth, about scheduling, about which thing is more of a priority. Is it more of a priority that I go to this meeting in person, which will be great, and I'll get to see a ton of people, and that'll be very productive, or I have these two online meetings that are happening at the same time? Like, is that my priority? And just being more deliberate about that. And I think as folks work more in more remotely and more in the technology comes into being, making sure that those personal connections exist, even if that's not necessarily part of your job, is just going to be something that's super important to navigate all of this.
Well said. Well said. And I would add too, you're talking all of these, the cognitive channels for us as humans are getting overloaded. And I think being able to distinguish what is the priority, right? The other piece of the pie is communication is not a medium, it's a skill. And unfortunately, we're kind of going into a direction, and a lot of conversations going on about this, about, well, we're going to have a Zoom, or we're going to have a Teams, or we're going to come together, we're going to meet for coffee, and that's great. It's a medium. It's not the skill, right? So something to keep in mind. And I think I see that as an upcoming challenge, is that we're getting overloaded. Are we really communicating?
So what I go back to something that a professor said. I think it was a statistics professor, which ironically, I didn't do really good in his class. But I do remember some wise words. And he said, the most predictable thing about humans is that they're unpredictable. And I think that we go into jobs, workplace, with a false sense of stability, and it almost guarantees us for disappointment. And I think what we have to be prepared for is constant change, mainly because of the way that technology is changing, the needs of what is required of our skill sets are changing at such a faster rate than we've ever seen before. And Altria right now is going through an optimization, new word, optimization, and looking at all of our processes end to end, and finally looking at it as a puzzle and not leaning on each department to think about it in their individual spaces. And I find that very refreshing. Now, will it have some unfortunate, outcomes? Probably. But in the aspect of setting up a company or, a work culture for success, I think it's what needs to be done, and we can't be scared of that. We can be part of the solution and constantly look for those optimization opportunities ourselves. A couple of years ago, I actually saw an opportunity within one of the departments I was in, and I said, I really think that this job needs to be created, and was able to essentially write my own job description for data simplification. and work with team members within that department to identify, okay, what are the mundane tasks that you're constantly doing that we can automate, that we can simplify, that we can get rid of? You know, like, are we asking ourselves, is anyone looking at these reports that we're generating? You know, you can turn on read receipts and, you know, just make sure. So, you know, just different things like that. I think we need to get smart with our time, or we're going to be completely inundated, as you said, with these meetings because we're not finding the simplifications. But change is scary, and you know, a lot of people like the automativeness of knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. But I really think that if we can change our mindset to that growth mindset, it'll make all of our workplaces more enjoyable, as well as take the shock factor away for that constant change that, I'm sorry, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, we can't be scared of it.
It's here.
It's here.
It's here. We are absolutely here with that, and that's tremendous advice. And I think that in a leadership capacity, one of the greatest things that we can do right now is bring everyone to the table, right? Bring the lenses. Sometimes people are very reluctant to speak for whatever reason. They could be shy. They could feel they might not know enough about the topic, but they have a lens that you don't. And so I think by bringing everyone to the table, these options for simplification and these options for efficiencies and the ability to say, I'm not going to go to that meeting. It's kind of scary a little bit, or I'm supposed to be at that meeting. We're going to open it up at the end. But bringing everyone to the table and giving them that voice is actually what the workplace is looking for right now. People want to be heard. People want to know that they have value and that they're contributing. And I can't, honestly, I could keep talking, but I'm moderating. So I'm going to leave it to these fine ladies here. It's just super, super important. So one more question before we open it up to the audience. Let's go with, tell us how mentorship has unveiled a trajectory for both your personal and professional growth. We'll start with you, Laura.
Okay. So much is the very short answer to that. And I've been very fortunate in my career to have mentors who address both the personal and professional and trying to figure out how to balance those. Some of that is luck, but identifying, you know, in my case, women that I've worked for who I've been able to have conversations with that were able to really challenge me to think about what type of place I want to work on the personal side, right? Like, what is the work environment that will make you succeed the most and make you the happiest? And also to think about the balance between personal and professional. As Beth said, like, working in government, it's a pressure cooker for a long time, but there was a time when I definitely thrived on that, and that's very much what I wanted. And really enjoyed, but just kind of having mentors that would challenge to think about what you want the work environment to look like and then how you can succeed in that. And somebody told me once, by the way, and I'm going to remember it before we end this session, but they recommended a book to me. It was somebody that I was having just a coffee connect with at a time when I was looking to change jobs. And the premise of the book, which I will remember the name of, it was basically to look at what do you want your life to look like? And not necessarily like, oh, I want to be an engineer, like not necessarily on that kind of specific skill set, but more of like, what is the type of environment I want to work in? Like, am I somebody who wants to work by myself? Am I somebody who likes to have a lot of people around me? That kind of thing, and to think about that in 4 different kind of areas of your life, like personal, professional, the intersection therein, and then to think about what are the career opportunities that you have the skill sets for, because again, a lot of skill sets will transfer, and to look out what the opportunities might be there, and to find these mentors that can help identify that is really helpful.
I think that's an excellent point, and we often don't think about the fact that we get to select the environment. The environment doesn't select us. So you have to bloom where you're planted. So I love the fact that your mentors have guided you to fit you to that environment.
Right.
I think that's fantastic. Beth?
So the word I don't think I remember hearing that word until I was probably 10 years into working. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't a formal thing. I was practicing law in my early 30s, and law firms are horrible for mentors. But I looked back and I realized that 8 of the first 9 years of my career, I worked for a woman, and we didn't have that term, but she was an amazing mentor to me that I look back and I think about a lot. But I don't look at mentor. I mean, at Hilton, we have a great mentorship program, and I actually have a mentee who said she's based in Shanghai, and so it's hard to find time. She's worked for Hilton for 17 years. I've been there 14 months, and I kind of wonder who's the mentor and who's the mentee. But it's great. They've put benchmarks in this program for us, and we're having structured discussions, and we're both setting goals, and it's lovely. I've never experienced anything like this before. So mentors can come in a lot of different ways. Mentors, you can work for them. They can work for you.
Yep.
And you said something earlier. You learn what to do and what not to do. Those are important mentors. But I look at it in a very, I don't know, not in a very, I guess, stable way. But not stable, but not finite. And I think you can learn from people everywhere, and especially your peers. Never discount your peers. I feel like people who are younger, they want to talk to everybody who's senior. They want to talk to the most, the highest position they can, because they think they're going to get the most wisdom from that person. And you might, but I think the best network you have, they're your peers, and just don't ever discount that.
Yep.
And then be deliberate about what you want to do and kind of where you are. There's an arc to everything. I'm at a very new arc of where I am and trying to figure out what that looks like. And then I think recognizing when you're kind of at the end of an arc. That's really hard to do. But now I'm getting away from your question.
Actually, I think the parlay was excellent. In the mentoring, you have the mentor-mentee. It's ongoing. It's constant. It changes as your career moves. It changes as your life moves. And but the end of the arc, all right, someone concoct the first question for this group, because after Lauren delivers her answer about mentorship, we will open it up to the floor.
So I'm very rigid, I guess, with the way that I look at mentorship. And I encourage you, if you want to take that approach, to look at resources online on how to build your board of directors. So I went through a lot of change. I had my first son, the week of COVID. And so I went out on maternity leave and came back to everyone being in the office. And I can probably count on one hand how many times I've been in the office since then. Because of that, I've moved closer to family. I've had another child, had another one on the way. So I've just been in a constant stream of transition and change, and honestly finding myself. So what I've realized is, talking about the arc, the end of the arc, the board of directors I had established before having children looks very different to the ones that I have today. There are some that are still on there, and I won't go into the details of it because there are more well-equipped people online that can explain it. But looking for women that I could look up to that had been through some of the similar life changes as myself. But also, I like the perspective of working fathers, because I think that they have a different outlook in the office. I think that they're able to turn their brains off a little bit different with their family, and I'm jealous of that. So I do have a working father on my board of directors as well, and I change the cadence of how I meet with these people according to what I need from them at that time. Mm-hmm. So there's some mentors that I meet monthly, quarterly, and then maybe just an annual check-in. Those would be more for your career growth. You know, if there's a certain department that you're interested in, just to keep tabs, keep your name in the hat. And I found it very beneficial because right now, as I said, we're going through optimization, and 3 of my mentors are in the room making the decision of my next career path out of 5. And I would have never known, a year ago that they would have been in that situation. But it's that diverse perspective that I'm looking for to also help me navigate how I want to present myself in meetings, which are all virtual. but yeah, that's been very helpful for me, and just having that very rigid structure helps me keep it organized as well.
Okay. All right. So a structured approach to mentoring, and you mentioned the diverse perspective. I know that Laura mentioned earlier, too, about finding those people for feedback that you might not have thought to be in your wheelhouse. So questions from the audience. Thank you all very, very much. And we're going to open it up for a few questions. We have about 10 minutes. Okay.
Which one?
Either one.
Okay, so this kind of goes back to question 2. Sorry, I'm also losing my voice. But about time management, not losing your voice and things like that when you're presented with these challenges. So I think, I don't know about you two, but I know you can relate since you said you have 3 small children. I also have small children and I'm self-employed. And just finding kind of those boundaries between work, because since I create my own work and commission and things like that, it's really hard for me to disconnect from that, but at the same time feeling really guilty about feeling like I'm neglecting the kids, but then finding my voice when people are like, well, I need to meet at this time and this day, but also knowing that I have my own responsibilities outside of that, if that makes sense.
Yes.
You might want to repeat the
I have
question,
not
guys.
figured that out 100%, but I am currently on my own journey trying to navigate that. So
You guys might want to repeat the question.
Oh.
A little bit.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, no.
She-
Sorry, somebody
they
with
can't
the
hear.
mic. Yeah, yeah.
She's asking like, Beth or Regina, why don't you're good at summarizing the question.
So essentially, she asked, how do I keep track of my children and my clients at the same time without feeling guilt in either direction? Who in here has children? It's craziness. But we are heroes, right, in every capacity. So the balance, what's the secret for the non-guilt? That, I think, is the biggest piece.
Or like the boundary, like what's one thing that helps you instill a boundary between separating work and
There you go.
Prioritization. So, you've got to be okay with how you've prioritized. And you can't have guilt. Once you make that priority, what's your values? That has to be what carries your subconscious. And don't let it eat you alive at night. I know it's so hard. You lay in bed and you're like, oh, I should have done this, should have that. But just finding a way to turn off that brain and just knowing I'm doing the best I can. You've got to accept that, and you've got to believe it in your heart as well. But I'm not going to sit here and say I figured it out either.
That's a great question. Then we had one here.
So my question is for Beth. I work in the government. I've been working in the government for 15 years. And I'm trying to figure out, I know the industry that I want to go into, but I also value my government career because of retirement benefits. And it is, once you are in like GS and all that, there's a level of job security and just regularly moving up that's not there in other places. So my question is, how can I kind of keep the door open while I explore in a new industry? And how do I just make that transition with building the network? Because I don't even know, like, the government, we're very rigid. Like, so I don't know what the corporate world and networking and all that stuff, how that translate to getting in, the type of industry or position that you want.
Well, I wish that I would have been more thoughtful and deliberate about it. I wasn't. I didn't pull up. And I told myself at 40 that I would, and then I didn't, and all of a sudden 50 was there. So I think it's great you're thinking about it. And you said 15 years, and there is a very specific cadence to those benefits kicking in, and you know when they're going to be. And if you know what industry you want to go into, I think you kind of alluded that you might, and that's and well, yeah, it's
I see a mentor-mentee relationship.
We were named the best place to work in the world last
Yes, they were.
Not it was last year. We're still very high up. You know, I think it's, what did I say earlier? It's being very precise. And you have an industry, I didn't. And so it was very intimidating for me. It was hard for me to honestly to make the leap. But I think it's one person, and it's meeting that person. And we should talk after this. And I have a colleague here, Brittany, who you should talk to as well. And then saying, who else should I talk to? And maybe you're not going to leave for 5 or 10 years, but that's not going to be time wasted. And it's just kind of one step in front of the other, really basic stuff. And I'm trying to do that for myself right now. I think we overcomplicate things and then we don't do anything. So just make one call, and this can be it. And let's talk about Hilton, and then say, give me one other person. But yeah, be deliberate about it, and figure out, because that's a money question, really, about how long to stay. And it's values too. I don't want to, because I stayed a very long time, but you got to look at both sides, and we're being short-sighted for ourselves and our future if we aren't.
Thank you. Actually, I want to talk to Beth too after. The reason is I had government service. I supported men and women in uniform for 20 plus years with the DoD, Department of Defense, and I got early retirement so that I wanted to give back to the community, which is Roanoke, and I'm a sub-teacher for, Roanoke County. Now, I want something different. When I had actually Virginia Western is my alma mater as well. I got degree in hotel restaurant management, so I guess a Hilton fits. I'm forcing myself to that, and then of course I got bachelor's degree in liberal arts. So I'm at this point. I do want to have different, maybe perhaps a career. I'm not so sure that's exactly the right word that I would use, but I want to do something different. So you jump from government to Hilton. Doesn't sound very either risky or exotic. So maybe perhaps I will talk to you to get some information on that.
I wish that I had a great answer for that. I think we got to get out of our own way and talk to people. And we're so bad at it. We're all busy. And it's hard, I think, especially later, because these are really basic questions we're asking, and that's the secret, I think, to getting older, is you find yourself asking these really basic questions. Yeah. And I love hearing the answers over here on the rigid approach. Like, I need to do more of that. I think there is a bit of a generational difference in how we approach that, and listening. Like, I need to do more, but I think it's what I said before. It's really basic conversations coming here. Right? I mean, that shows already that you are trying to go down a different path. And I have to give a shout out to Senator Warner's staff for what they do here every year.
Absolutely.
I know the work that they must put in behind the scenes, and they're doing this because this is a labor of love. I can't imagine like what they're putting in and getting out is probably fairly uneven. But it's amazing that they're doing it. And, get some cards today, right? And go back and talk to people, because we're not alone and trying to figure this all out. And you have, thank you for your service all those years, DOD, and now teaching, it sounds like. I mean, that's a lot of service-minded. Yeah. So I don't know. I wish I had better words of wisdom, but talk to people. It's just so we just get in our bubbles and we don't. And we're never going to put the pieces together otherwise.
So mentor and mentee relationship, do you formally announce? Say, okay, so would you like to be my mentor? See, in government, we never had that
We
opportunity.
have 2 minutes. So definitely get with her afterwards. We have 2 minutes. We have 2 questions. I'd like to try to get those in. Nick, are we good? Okay. Right back here.
So mine is kind of for Laura and Beth. So I have about 25 years in the IT industry, and mine went from a corporate world to the school division, and I kind of had the same job. It sounds similar to what Laura had. and my job was created in the school system to kind of eliminate processes, that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, I had no support from my upper management, which I reported directly to the CFO. I was unfortunately in a pressure cooker, had no support. I asked for many months, and as of the first of the month, I couldn't take it anymore. I looked for months, and as of now, I'm unemployed. And I'm 52 years old, deciding it was such a mess that am I ready to change careers?
Sounds like an exciting opportunity.
Well,
We've got 1 minute and folks waiting outside to take the room. So is we can have one quick answer, but maybe. I thank you all for coming here. This is a wonderful opportunity for all of us. Please connect with our speaker group because I see these mentor-mentee growth opportunities coming. But without further ado, we need to let our other folks into the room. Thank you very much, everyone.